Welcome, everybody, to episode 5 of the Dad Pod. That's the Dad Bod. Drop the P, add the B, because I do have a dad bod, but today is the Dad Pod. So today is episode 5 of the Dad Pod with Brad Alexander. So since we're only on episode 5, I would like to give an introduction about where this came from and why. I started learning when I got into real estate and owning my own business, the word why. I wish when I was a coach, I would have asked my players that question a lot more, the why. So I grew up in a small town, and it seemed like rumors spread about people and to people and everything through the coffee shops. So instead of judging people or saying this or saying that, I just want to put a person on our show once a week, and just not that people talk about our guests, but hey, I just want to get to know one person a week, things that we may not always know about them. So there's your Dad Pod. Just when the theme of it is building relationships one conversation at a time. I'm Brad Alexander. I am a realtor in the Central Texas area. Me and my wife have a real estate business, and our guest last week said that they went through a career shift. Well, you know what? Our real estate market is going through a market shift right now. It's not bad. It's just bad because the most recent market was the pandemic market, and that was like once in a lifetime market. So if you ever need any real estate help, this is the Dad Pod presented to you by the Alexander Home Team, Keller Williams. So we got to give a shout out to that. But that's enough about me. That's enough about the show. With further ado, let's welcome our guest, Chris Smith, the pastor of the Fellowship Church at Plum Creek, amongst other things. Who is Chris Smith?
Hey, Brad. Thanks for having me on the podcast, and I'm glad that I could be at least a guest after the girls showed out and did an amazing job on there. So yeah, who's Chris Smith? I remember as a kid always wanting to be a football coach, just having this dream of coaching football, playing quarterback, going to NFL, and God let me do that dream, not going to the NFL, but going to be a chance to be a coach. And that was always my dream, influencing kids through sports. And, as I grew in my life and in sports, all of a sudden this guy named Jesus Christ came into my life when I was a sophomore in high school. And, it became the real reason that I do the things that I do. And, we got to be rivals in coaching over the years. Brad and I did. And so, it's just been an adventure getting to live out a life for Christ through coaching, influence the people for Christ through the coaching and through teaching algebra. And now I'm a lead pastor. And so it's been quite an adventure.
So let's take a step back a little bit and take this one step at a time. So
Yeah.
whenever I posted that we were going to interview you this week, Craig Phillips, who's from San Marcos High School, said that you were the quarterback of San Marcos High School. Is that
Yep.
is that true?
Yeah. So I was a quarterback starting my sort of junior year in high school. And then really my senior year, we had a coaching change and got to be the quarterback there. Yeah. So I was a 5-sport letterman back at San Marcos High School. Football, basketball, I played shooting guard, kind of utility guy, do all the dirty work, take charges, get dunked on, but take the charge. Good thing there wasn't YouTube back then. Um, and then, played baseball, ran track, high jump, and long distance, and loved soccer. So I played soccer, all through
Wow.
my life. But yeah, I excelled at sports because I found a lot of, um, I don't know, my self-worth in that. And so I was pretty driven in those things, and God gave me some abilities to do some of that stuff. So yeah, I played quarterback, loved it. That's where I really got my offensive mind from. Coach Mills was my coach my senior year and just really took me under his wing. Coach Collier, who I know, CC, took me under his wing and just taught me a lot about how to motivate people, how to lead people. And my 5th game of my senior year, my life changed in some dramatic ways. I got injured really severely my 5th game of my senior year. We were doing pretty well as San Marcos. We were 3-1-1. Our loss was to Judson, which is no shame in that. But I broke my left ankle, tore everything, had a spiral fracture. I actually have 3 screws holding my ankle together today, which actually I've never sprained my left ankle since high school now because it's made of metal. So yeah, I mean, my season went from, having an opportunity to go to college on scholarship to play quarterback to, hey, we don't know for sure if you're ever going to be able to play football again. If you break your leg again, you may not walk right because, medicine's come a long way since, 1989. But yeah, so, my life changed dramatically, but I wouldn't change it. I ended up walking on at Texas State to play football and became a kicker and a punter because, they're not supposed to hit you back there. And so I was also kicking and punting at San Marcos High School also. So yeah, it's been an adventure. I love quarterbacking. I was a quarterback coach when I started working with varsity as well. So that way I could show the kids how to do stuff. So yeah, it's been quite the adventure. San Marcos is a great place to play football, but we didn't win a lot. We were in San Antonio's kind of north side district, northeast district, and the Judsons, Churchills. There wasn't Wagner back then, but it was a powerhouse district, and we're the little old Rattlers trying to go out there and win some football games.
So you were an athlete, and then obviously you went to college and so on and so forth, and then you became a coach. And the coach Chris Smith that I know is so Chris, just for y'all out there, Chris came to my high school right as I left high school. So he was never my coach, but it was close in there. And then I go off to college to become a coach, and he's coaching at my old high school. And I would say there's a couple of things that stand out to me about Chris Smith, the coach. Number one, probably the only person that Bob Shelton gave permission to pass the ball, gave permission to call more than 5 pass plays in a game to, right? I remember growing up and playing, and Ragsdale was our offense coordinator, and we practiced all kinds of pass. I mean, a whole passing offense. We very seldom ever threw the ball.
Yeah, there are a lot of games where our running backs threw more passes than our quarterbacks when I first started. There, the trick plays, the veer, pitch pass, Lynn reverse pass, all those sort of plays where our quarterback didn't throw it, but our receivers and our running backs did. So, yeah.
And then I'm coaching, and I'm at Del Valley High School. Chris is at Hayes High School. And sure enough, Chris opens up the game as offensive coordinator with a tight end playing offensive tackle. Was that Breakvogel?
No, that was a Hunter Bohm, actually.
Okay. And Breakvogel was the quarterback.
So he kind of played what before it was called an H-back. He kind of played what an H-back would have been. So we knew you would know where he was. So we snuck the slowest Hunter Bohm, love you, Hunter, guy in there. He almost got caught. You guys caught him right at the goal line, but he fell in. So
Chris puts the left tackle out at receiver on the right side with his hands like this, right?
You couldn't see his number.
Why do I know all this to a tease? Because I stole the play and tried to run it every year, and we never could run it as good as. So anyway, Chris opens up the game with tight end playing left tackle right down the middle of the field, wide open. Of course, nobody's going to cover a tackle running a pass route, right? And open up the game with a touchdown. And I don't know if that's the exact same game, but later on, either that game or the next year, Del Valley beats Hayes High School, probably the first and only time in overtime for the district championship.
Yeah, that was the next year.
Was that the next year? So
yeah,
all those years get wrapped up. So me and Chris were rivals, you would say, in the coaching world. I was offensive coordinator. He was an offensive coordinator. And then
Yeah. And we had some shootouts in those games. And yeah, I was really blessed to be underneath of Bob Shelton for, I coached 17 years and he was the head coach there. We both retired from coaching the same year.
Oh
Him
wow.
obviously with a lot more wins and a lot more experience than I had, even though we actually have the same birthday, October 4th, 31 years apart. But yeah, we were kind of kindred spirits. And yeah, he was so good to me. I started as the seventh grade C team coach. Teaching. We had a C team that didn't know how to put their pads on, and coaching them, learning how to lose really quick, playing Wimberley's A team and things like that. I still remember Van Ooch, one of our seventh graders, getting drugged 10 yards into the end zone because his first time playing football, and they had a man playing seventh grade, and getting a chance to go from that to work my way up, and people like Steven Martinez, who was I got to coach him as a seventh grader. Then I coached him again as a ninth grade quarterback, and then get to coach him as a senior. Just had a chance to kind of move up through the ranks, and Doug was really good to me in those years of just, um, you know, pushing me the way Doug does. And, eventually Doug, moving over to the defensive side and allowing me to be the offensive coordinator, which, I can't thank him enough for. I remember us playing Westlake those years. Bob had come to me earlier in the season and said, "Hey, I want you to put in 4 shotgun plays," which, being a former Hayes Rebel, what a great commitment, what a compliment that is from Bob Shelton, to go from the wishbone to all of a sudden running the shotgun. So I got to put in 4 plays, and I got to pretty much call them on long distance passing plays, things like that. But it was such a blessing to see the confidence he had to let me kind of open up the offense. And, they've always been creative with formations, but now getting a chance to do that. And our big breakthrough came, I think it was in, was it 2005 with Nash McFeeters. We had started to open up the offense, and they had run some one back with Doug as the offense coordinator. But that year, Nash was just a magician. I mean, he was an amazing with the ball, and we had an amazing running back, Amadeus Waters, who ended up playing at Colorado State, and really great. But he got hurt in that game, and we didn't have quite that quality, that depth at that time. And Nash just diced people up with the passing game, and that allowed Bob to really see the power of mixing up an offense, play action, and being able to lead pass and all these things that really opened up the run game and the option game. And I just enjoyed seeing Bob be able to trust me in those things. And I was a little sneaky, to be honest with you. I remember us having what we call breakfast taco plays. You'll appreciate this. When Bob's calling the plays and I'm the kind of secondary play caller, if I wanted my play called a certain time, I had to make it what's called a breakfast taco play, which meant that if that play didn't score a touchdown, I had to buy breakfast tacos for the Saturday morning coaches meeting. So I made sure those plays were well practiced, and really I found something in the defense that I wanted to exploit at a certain time. And so I only had to buy breakfast tacos, I think, twice in 8 years. But it was one of those things that you kind of just create this mystique around the breakfast taco plays. I put it on this play sheet. Hey boys, this is the breakfast taco play this week. I'm not buying tacos.
And
You
don't you
better
make
make
me
it.
buy tacos for coaches either.
Yeah. And the kids would make like a one-handed catch, like out of nowhere. Or it was awesome to see their confidence be able to grow. Like, oh, coach sees something, it's gonna be open. I trust it, right? And helping them giving them that confidence. So it was a blast. Bob was so good to me, letting me, you know, expand the offense. We would shift out of the wishbone into no back and motion people, which was just stuff that he didn't always, to be honest, understand. He just trusted, hey, I've seen this work in practice. I've seen it drive Dennis Lenari crazy. I've seen it, do all these Gary Gaddy's going crazy up front. So Mitch doesn't know what he's doing. Mitch is over there like, do this play. By the way, Mitch Phillips, unsung hero of those teams. I mean, if you were watch the red team, sophomore team play, he had more trick plays than I had out there. He's running like double skip pass on the sophomore team, the JVB team. It was awesome. Shout out to Mitch. But
Those were
I
all my
love,
high school coaches.
yeah,
So actually, Here's one for you. Mitch he got his first job my 7th grade year. So he was
Yeah.
my junior high. Mitch Phillips was my junior high coach, and then he moved up, kind of like you said, that one player that moved up whenever he was my 9th grade coach, and
Hmm.
then he moved up to varsity later. So yeah, it was Phillips and Gaddy and all those guys. There's only one left now, trainer man,
Yep.
Coach
Mark
Winter.
Winters, baby.
He's still there. Still, shout out to Coach Winter, one of our best friends. Well, you know Kenta Wint.
Hmm.
Kenta's
Yep.
daughter is a trainer for the athletic department, and so yeah, we could all tell some Coach Winter stories. But
Oh
when
man.
you talk about let's dive in real quick to Coach Shelton. So whenever I went around in the coaching world, and of course I coached in Hillsboro and Huntsville and Gonzales, and whenever I go to conventions and those type of things, you always tell people where you played high school ball at and blah blah blah. And I played for Coach Shelton. You worked for
Hmm.
Coach Shelton, and I later worked for a guy, Tim Edwards. So Coach Shelton is the only coach to take a school from Class B to Class 5A at the same school,
Hmm.
to be a head coach in all the different levels, B, 1A, 2A, 3. Well, Shelton did it all at one school. Tim Edwards, my first athletic director in Huntsville, he also did it, but he did it at different schools. And
Yeah.
so what's working for a legend like that was a head coach for, I mean, how was it, 46 years, something of the
40,
sort?
I think 46 years. Yeah.
What's the one thing if somebody said, I always like to go to conventions or meet people and say, hey, if you could give me one piece of advice, what would it be? If you could say one thing that Bob Shelton gave you, what would or inspired you, or what's the one thing you could take away from working for Bob Shelton?
Yeah. I think one of the things I think about Bob was he just loved people. So, I mean, after the game, the coaches would go to his house and they would hang out. Bob just loved his players, right? And he was a pretty mild mannered person. He wasn't that classic coach that's going to be screaming and yelling at you unless he used it very wisely, right? So he was a genuinely caring, loving guy. But if you lit the fuse, he wasn't afraid to just rip you a new one and when he did, you knew you deserved it, right? Like you hit someone late at practice, one of your own teammates, and he would just rip you a new one, yeah, because you were wrong and it deserved that sort of measured approach. And so I think one of the things I learned from him the most is just genuinely caring about your players and that your players will play harder from you when they love you than when they fear you. So the fact that they didn't want to disappoint me or they didn't want to disappoint Bob made them, and I think you see this in like the 300th win, just the joy of the players when we won Bob's 300th game, right? They wanted to win it for him, right? And so that just showed that genuine love that he had. He wasn't afraid to fire it up. And so I think that's one of the things I learned from him is just genuinely, you didn't have to cuss, you didn't have to yell, you didn't have to scream all the time. You could genuinely care. But if you needed to bring that up, I remember myself, I wasn't really a yeller in those things. I'm more cerebral, more Andy Reid kind of mode. Drawing, I'm in the middle of, you know, staff meetings and I'm drawing plays and doodling and oh, I'm going to use this breakfast taco play material right here, while they're teaching me about how I'm supposed to do the attendance stuff, during in service. But yeah, I mean, but there's times where we were halftime of layman, and I think the game was like 7-7, and we had fumbled like twice, and we were mailing it in, and I just ripped them a new one, and we just came out and scored like 28 straight and put it to bed. But you reserving that moment for when it's right. And that just comes from caring for your players. That's why I've been so blessed, even as a pastor of church. Stephen Martinez, who I was mentioned earlier, I coach as a 7th grader, a 9th grader, a 12th grader. And now I get to be in his life at our church and in his kids' life, Ollie and Alicia's life, his wife. And so just get to still be involved in their life because we genuinely had a relationship there, right? And it goes to the Brooks Pinkerts and the Bry Fogels and all those guys that I love and have a relationship with, that it's neat to build that relationship in them. And that it really kind of falls over into life, genuinely caring for people, like as a parent, loving your kids, but not being afraid to jump on them when they need it, but genuinely teaching servant leadership, that kind of idea. And that Bob was great at that. And we, the things that I didn't love about Bob was he was a morning person, and I would stay up to do film. We didn't have all this cool huddle stuff back in the day, right? So we're VHS doing those things. I get done at 3 a.m. and Bob's like, we're watching film at 6 a.m. because that Bob, he was there at 6 a.m. all the time. So I'm dragging in the next morning, 3 hours sleep, a towel on my head, barefoot, just crawling into there. And so even on Sundays, he was like, we're working from 6 to 9, and then you're going to church. And he just made time. That afternoon was your time with your family, but gear up for Monday, getting ready to go. So yeah, I think he had a genuine care for his coaching staff. He had a genuine care for his players, but he wasn't afraid to mix it up if they needed it.
So speaking of that, you speak a little bit about church. So you were a coach, and then all of a sudden, you're not a coach. I mean,
Yeah.
I was a coach, and then all of a sudden, one day that passion, for me at least, that passion just wasn't there. I was missing my kids. There was multiple different things going on, but I left the coaching world. Um, so one day you're the offensive coordinator at Hayes High School, and the next day you're not, and you go into pastorship.
Mm-hmm.
Give
Yeah.
us that journey.
Well, it started in 1995 after a junior high game. Flay Strawn came and asked me if I wanted to work with the youth of their church at FBC Kyle, and I said, sure. I like kids, I love Jesus, so sure. Well, that's what actually moved us to Kyle. We were in San Marcos before that. After graduating from Texas State, Tara was still in college at that point. We had gotten married pretty young. She was between her, I think, sophomore, junior year, between junior, senior years, we got married. But we moved to Kyle. We had Fonzie's and Dairy Queen back in the day.
And that's
And
it.
that was all of us. Kyle, the Burger King, right? At Kohler's, passing by Kohler's Ranch, you go to Burger King. We moved in to a house and kind of started building ourselves in this community. And so he asked me to work with youth, and I started working with youth. I worked at First Baptist Kyle for I think 14 years, and then there was this little church plant that we had a lot of friends that went to called Fellowship Church at Plum Creek. And there's a guy named Jonathan Leftwich, which interestingly enough, Jonathan worked with my best friend, David Payton, in college. And David Payton was the one who led me to Christ and was my, best man in wedding. And I was his best man. Well, he started working with Jonathan Leftwich and invite us to get together. And that's where we kind of made this connection. And when I resigned from FBC Kyle, we started going to Fellowship, and they had a need for a youth pastor. And I just kind of got involved there. And as Fellowship began to grow, we just needed another staff member. And it just kind of coincided with what you're saying. That's God. I still had a passion for teaching and coaching because I loved it. I mean, every August I had this itch. I'd be in the middle of our church staff meeting, doodling plays and drawing. I still do. I was at a meeting today in New Braunfels, and I started doodling football plays on there, right? Because I just love the chess match, which is finding a flaw and designing a way to make something happen. And but yeah, God just started saying, no, I want you to love this more than you love. I mean, I was passionate about football. I felt like the school was my mission field. Even the classroom, I loved the classroom and getting kids to love math because they loved me. So they end up loving math and making it something that's fun and interesting. But God was just, saying, I want you to love me more. I want you to step away, and I got something great. And I was fine my whole life being the second fiddle. And that's something I would encourage people to realize, like, man, not everybody has to be, the boss. Sometimes it's so great to just be that. I would have been the second fiddle to Jonathan Leftwich for my whole life and felt like I was accomplishing the will of God and doing that because, I mean, I love being that support and that encouragement. but God had a different plan for me in that. And so, yeah, whenever we left football, it was reluctant, but I also looked at my daughter, who was 12, Shelby, who's now in Thailand on mission around the
Oh,
world,
wow.
helping girls get out of the sex trade, helping them have a new job. She teaches cosmetology to girls that have been rescued. I don't know if you've seen the Sound of Freedom movie, which is just an incredible movie about child trafficking. But the organization she's involved in for Freedom International, they rescue girls out of the red light district in Phuket, put them in the safe house. And then Shelby is the end part of that process where she teaches them a new trade. You don't have to sell your body. You have this new skill that you can use and support your family with. And so, but I looked at Shelby, she was 12, and I thought back to the hours that I spent at football, and I was doing some calculation. I missed about 4 years of her life coaching other people's kids, and I just God saying, "Hey, you need to step away and you need to invest in your kid's life and your wife." My wife's amazing. We had 4 kids in 5 years, and she would dress them up and bring them to the games. Every game I had, every basketball game, because I did the tough back to back of football and basketball. So it was
That's
just a
another thing that
long,
we have in common. I did football,
yeah,
basketball.
exactly. And
Uh,
we got to coach against each other in both those
and
things.
those, and we were both like in similarities. We were at, playing. You said second fiddle. We were both coordinators of a 5A high school, which is now 6A. Um, that's at the pinnacle of a career. I mean, there's people that can work their entire lives try to get to where we were, and then all of a sudden, I tell people I found Christ through Jonathan, and I tell people, and I know you probably don't like my references much, but I tell people whenever I make plans, God says, "Hold my beer and watch this," right? Because He's like, "No, you don't get to make the plans. These are my plans." Um,
Yeah, I
and
probably
so,
would phrase it in,
yeah,
a man's heart makes his steps, but the Lord directs them, right? I probably wouldn't use the whole beer my reference, but I would just quote the Bible probably in there. But yeah,
so yeah.
it's
So
so
I
true
mean,
though.
we were at that place in our career, both of us, and walked away from it. And you became the youth pastor. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I was a full-time youth pastor, and at that point at Fellowship Church, we were kind of doing everything. Jonathan and I were I was associate pastor, groups pastor. I pretty much done every job, janitor, setup guy, slide person. I designed our website. So when you're a small church plant like that, we just kind of did everything together. Luckily, Jonathan was a super talented guy, and the Lord gave me a lot of gifts in how to learn. And so we just learned a lot of skills and kind of built out everything, from there. But yeah, youth pastoring is my passion. I love youth culture. I love youth kids. They're so impressionable for the gospel's sake. And man, they have endured so much in their young lives that the amount of stuff that a young person nowadays has to battle against is, man, not like when we were in school, right? Like I'd have to wait till Monday to figure out I didn't get invited to the party. Where nowadays, like literally, it's being posted real time,
On
and I find
Snapchat.
out I got left out, right? And so they just face so much that I had this passion to teach them, to hang with them. I love to play, and so even last night I went to youth group just so I could play some football, play some quarterback, play some ultimate frisbee, play red bird, yellow bird, blue bird, Um, so I just love to play, and youth culture is a great place to do that, and you can earn that respect by doing what they do and doing it well. And so I love that.
So you're the youth pastor at Fellowship Church of Plum Creek,
Hmm.
and then we get this thing called a pandemic,
I heard of that thing
and,
before.
and then all of a sudden the Lord tells Jonathan,
Hmm.
Jonathan, you need to go to Rockport.
Yep.
And so Chris, talk to us a little bit about taking. So we're not that. So Fellowship of Plum Creek is not that little bitty plant anymore. It is
No,
now.
not.
It is now. At the time of the pandemic, it had grown up, and I don't know the numbers.
Yeah.
What I do know is, I think maybe you've told me this. The average church in America is 100 people.
Yeah. 70% of churches in America are under 100 people. Yeah.
And we have 100 people coming to 3 different sermons on Sunday morning. So we have
Yeah,
basically
we have we have 3 services, and our first service is just a little bit over 100, and then the other 2 are pretty full that are there. So we're bigger than our early church plant days. That's for
yeah.
sure.
So
But yeah.
this thing called a pandemic happens, and
Mhm.
then right in the beginning of it, not the middle of it, the beginning of it, um, Jonathan announces the Lord's called me to Rockport, Texas,
Yep.
and so um, you take over by growing a very large established church. Can you talk about going from second fiddle to where now you know
Yeah. You
your
got to take all the
decision?
responsibility.
Goodness,
Yeah. I just think it's how the Lord works is pretty amazing. How He called Jonathan away. I was heartbroken when Jonathan told me. I broke down into tears because my man's taken off. What are we going to do next? And I didn't know that I would be called to be that next pastor, but God had aligned it so strongly in my heart, my wife's heart, and the elders of our church heart that I was going to be the guy that God wanted to take us through that next phase. And I told them, like, guys, it might be a pretty short phase. Maybe I blow the church up for 3 months and then God brings in the right person. Who knows? But it's been 3 years now. So God's been faithful in that. But one of the things that I really appreciate about our church family and just the way the church did things, we announced to the church that Jonathan was leaving on May 31st. The decision had already been made that they wanted me to become the lead pastor. So then, on I think it was like June 7th, Jonathan and I made that announcement that I would be the next lead pastor, and we preached together for a month. So we spent a month like co-preaching, so the church could get to know me as not just the youth pastor, because I had stepped away from that. We brought in Brandon George, which was one of our former youth, someone that I love to death, and I discipled from being a student in Hayes High School. I coached Brandon when he was a freshman, and he would hide from me because I coached him in hurdles. I'd find him hiding behind the high jump pits to make him go run the hurdles, which he was amazing at the hurdles. And he grew up in our church family, and he's now working with Jonathan in Rockport at the church there. But yeah, we preached together, and I think that was a great transition. I always use an analogy with I'm a coach, right? A track, right? When you're running the relay, you're handing off the baton, right? There's a moment where you're both running together with it as you're securing it, and then you let go. And Jonathan did an amazing job of that, of running with me, handing off the baton to me, and then I got to take over. But of course, I took over my first Sunday by myself was July 5th of 2020. And we were already starting indoor services, socially distanced. We'd already created a system of buying tickets, Eventbrite. And so, navigating through that, when I look back on it, I think, man, what a tough time to take over as a pastor. But when you're in the moment and you're just trying to love people, care for people, it's different being together in person than watching online. It just is. It's just something different about the spirit of the people that are together with you, worshiping the Lord. I still remember the first Sunday back after the pandemic and getting to sing and hearing people around you sing was just such a beautiful moment of connection with people. I think people really crave that. And one thing that the pandemic did, I think, is it really separated people's allegiances, right? If you were going to go to church, you were going to have to risk something to go to church. And so it turned into this sort of pseudo persecution, I guess you could say, in some ways, of that you had to make a choice for the Lord that may not involve your safety in there, right? And so our church, God was so faithful to us, and it did a great job of endurance through the pandemic, and God's just blessed us, and we're continuing to do the things that we do for the community and loving people, and things like Night in Bethlehem. I remember trying to do Night in Bethlehem, December of 2020, with social distanced groups from scenes, and people driving down the street just going, "Oh, we saw lights on. What's going on?" We're like, "Oh, we're doing this thing Night in Bethlehem." Like, okay, we just so excited that something was happening. Can we come do it? And we had a chance to present the gospel to all of these people through the story of Jesus's birth at Christmas time. So it was great. But I look back, I'm thinking, man, people could have really struggled during that time. But this is something I learned even in coaching. I got a chance to call 2-minute offense in football games. And one of the reasons that I was good at calling 2-minute offense is that my life didn't depend on us winning a football game. My life was secure in Christ, who I was. I identified with who Christ was, and he identified me as who I was. And so if I lost a game, it wasn't, my life wasn't shattered. And so in that moment, I was able to think clear. I was able to actually to enjoy those moments of stress. And it's just something God's given me my whole life, is to be able to enjoy pressure situations and handle them in a way that works, because my life's secure in who the Lord is. And so, so I think even in the pandemic, when I look back, I'm thinking, man, God's prepared me through, you know, first and goal from the 2-yard line in a playoff game with 43 seconds left, trying to drive the whole field with no timeouts. And like, well, if I can handle that situation, man, I can handle these other situations. I can make the hard call in a moment. If people don't agree with it, like, I have to ask for forgiveness if I made the wrong choice. I mean, ultimately you have to make, as a leader, you make choices that are difficult and not always popular, but based upon the information that you do the best you can in those scenarios. So COVID was just that. And we have a faithful church family that stuck by us through thick, thin, and high waters and all of it.
Back in the day when I was a young coach, I was so worried about the title at my desk. I wanted to have, I wanted it to say this or say that. And I moved around searching for those titles. Then you get those titles. And then in my case, I own my own business. You're running a very, you're in charge of a very large established church. And, sometimes I tell people, sometimes I'm like, I would, not that I want it, because I don't, I enjoy being the CEO or, the person we're the decision maker. But man, sometimes if I could just go back to my days of being on that real estate team and somebody giving me leads and clocking in and clocking out, that would be phenomenal. Because when you're in a leadership role, when things happen in our community, and Chris Smith gets a phone call at 12 o'clock at night, Chris Smith answers his phone at 12 o'clock at night because something has happened. And it's usually not very good. I mean, people don't call and give you good news at 12 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of where I've kind of shifted in my life, to where at one point I wanted it and needed it. And now I'm, like you said, you didn't need to win that football game to have validation. I don't need to sell their house. I want people to stay whenever I'm done working with them. And when I was coaching their kids as well, we may not have won the game, but I took a Del Valley, or we took a Del Valley team that the year before I took over the offense, it was 55-0 to Lake Travis, Baker Mayfield's junior year. Well, his senior year, that was like week 8 or something like that. And that was the first time in week 8 that we didn't win the game, but that was the first time all season long in week 7 or 8 that Baker Mayfield played in the fourth quarter. We had stayed with it. We went from 55-0 at halftime to, they're sweating some bullets over there. So I'm not about sympathy wins and those type of things, but I'm about improvement, the process, doing as good as sometimes the best you can do isn't good enough. And it is what it is.
And learning to enjoy the little things, right? Learning to enjoy, like I remember wanting to enjoy my kids when they were little, not wait for them to grow up to enjoy them, right? Or enjoy the little things about your job, like the people that you work with, or accomplishing a task and seeing it through to completion, and enjoying that. If you're faithful in the little things, you'll be faithful when the big things come up, right? And so just learn it doesn't matter. And for me, it doesn't matter what job I do, whether I'm working at Chick-fil-A in the back, I would love it. And I would lead people and be faithful in that in the same way. And so I think the people that have that sort of integrity and quality in the little things, you find out that when you get to the bigger things, you're able to handle them. Getting that call at 12:45 a.m. that I saw you had Officer Hippolito on the podcast a couple weeks ago, I think it was, and he does an amazing job with Forever 15 project that Janelle Dunn runs, one of the members of our church, but her son Noah passed away from fentanyl poisoning, and I got a chance to go be with them at the site and love on them at that spot. And that happened to be a Saturday night where I had to preach on Sunday, and I didn't sleep that whole night, just getting to be with them. But you do it because you love people, right? And you get a chance to have a big impact in people's lives when you're willing to do the little things that people don't always hear about. And so, yeah, I just encourage parents, just enjoy your kids, even when they're in that drooling phase, and even when they're in that awkward teenager phase, not waiting
From that
to
14,
enjoy them.
15-year-old getting nails done and yeah. And a little bit
awesome,
a little bit of sass in her tone of voice, and yeah.
That's why I'm so glad you had them on the podcast. Just hey, your first guests are your girls, and that's a memory you get to make with them. That hey, I value you and I value your opinion, and I want to hear from you, and I want to get to know you in a deeper way. And so, as dads dating your daughter, I got to talk to my daughter in Thailand this morning. This summer, my other daughter, Karis, got married to an awesome guy named David, who I was discipling already, and they ended up getting married. And just enjoying all of those moments when you have a chance, because before you know it, they're gone.
So speaking of family, tell us a little bit about you mentioned your wife, you mentioned a couple, tell us a little bit about Chris Smith, the father and husband.
Yeah, so I got married to my wife, Tara. We were both pretty young. I was 23, she was 20 when we got married. And we waited a little while to have kids, like only 3 years, 4 years. And then we had 4 kids at 5 years. So Shelby was born in 1998. And then Tyler, our son, born in 99, took a year off to build a house, the house we still live in Kyle. And then our daughter, Karis, was born in 2001. She was the only one I got to name, because my name's Chris Smith. So I wanted a kind of excited name. She still has trouble with people calling her chairs and different things. But anyway, and then our son Kale was born in 2002. And Kale's up in College Station right now, working full time, and he's doing great up there. I could see him being a future pastor someday, but an author, just a super creative guy, great athlete, played basketball many different years. And my daughter Karis is an elementary school teacher, and she teaches in Houston ISD. So pray for her as she's teaching kids and loving on them. I think she teaches 5th grade now, but she's student taught in Hayes as well. Her husband, David, is in seminary to become a professor at a seminary. That's his goal, to get a doctorate in Bible studies. He had a 4.0 in math, which he reminds me of, because I got a 3.86, which is pretty good, but he smashed me in that, which he reminds me of often. And then my oldest son, Tyler, he works as a manager up in, as a team lead up in Austin at HEB by Slaughter Lane. And he was a great athlete. He was 3-point bomber in basketball. You would appreciate that. I end up coaching. When you're a coach, you always coach. So you coach your kids' teams. And so I coached a varsity homeschool team called the San Marcos Panthers back in the day. And we were 36-11 one year, and we were bombing away, man, just shooting threes and playing the game, running. I kind of stole Golden State and the Spurs offense. So we kind of ran a version of that called flow. And but yeah, he was a team leader in that, and still outshoots me. When you're a dad, you never really let your kids win. But then when they get old enough to win, they don't let you win either. He's an awesome guy. I love him as well. And he's doing a great job. And of course, Shelby's in Thailand, and I'm dating a guy named Kyle, who is both my maybe future son-in-law is Kyle, but they're 6'5", seminary students right now. And so he just recently moved to Thailand to date her in person. And so we're excited about them and their relationship and seeing where that goes as well. But yeah, just Karis was an athlete, played basketball on the San Marcos Panther. Her team was, I think, 40-7 one year. They were outstanding as well. And so, yeah, I just love getting to be around and
then the rock of the family is your wife. Tell us a little bit about your wife.
Yeah, so my wife Tara, she is everything that I'm not, right? So I'm the creative scatterbrain, and she's the organized, just an amazing, beautiful soul, right? She has never really met a stranger. She, in fact, she works as a marketing director at Chick-fil-A Kyle, and we've had a chance to invite them over to our house. We have a Bible study of kids that work at Chick-fil-A, and it's just such a has an amazing spirit. She homeschooled our kids all the way through, which means that she was, I got to come home and be the principal, but she was the one doing it. She was an elementary school teacher, so she actually took over my job at Barton when I moved up to Hayes High School. She took my job at Barton until we started having kids, and then we had just prayed that the Lord would provide a way for her to stay at home. So she got a chance to stay at home with our kids and raise them, homeschool them. Shining Stars Christian Co-op, her and some other ladies in our community started, and we just homeschooled them all the way through. She's done everything from homeschool proms to, being the team mom for games. And she currently is a teacher at ODA, which is a one-day academy where she teaches math there, but also marketing director. She works also with a nonprofit called Kalea Villages in Africa, which is about kids sponsorship. And we had a chance to visit the kids in Africa this summer with a small team. And so, yeah, has her hand in a lot of things. She loves to work, loves to be busy, loves to meet with girls and disciple them. And yeah, just an amazingly beautiful person. Like, I would not be half the man I am today if I didn't have her by my side, spurring me to be better. And yeah, just going to meet an incredible person, meet my wife. She's amazing. As
You
you
know,
have an amazing wife as well. So
I do. And one time I sat down with Chris, and I was. It's amazing how the answers are so simple. If you just
mhm.
take a seat, look back. So I'm sitting down with Chris one time, and I'm like, Chris, I live with three females, and it takes them forever to do anything, right? And Brooklyn's not that bad, but yet now she's 15, and so now it's the makeup days and the hair and all that. So Brooklyn 12, boy, I said be ready in 5 minutes, and she was ready in 5 minutes. Brooklyn at 15, not quite five minutes, right? So I'm meeting with Chris, and I'm like, Chris, this is causing a I have a temper, I'm impatient, and this is just causing. And Chris was like, Brad, the answer is easy. And the problem is when I was ready to go somewhere, especially on trips, I would ruin the trip because I would get all temperamental and everything and throw a fit because they weren't ready on time. And Chris had the most simplest answer ever. Take separate vehicles. It's
Yep.
simple. So whenever I'm throwing a fit because they're not ready for church on Sunday, we just take a separate vehicle.
Yep.
And they're going to get there. My wife lives by the philosophy of ish,
hmm
5-ish, 6-ish. Um, I live by the philosophy of the coaching world. If you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late.
Yeah, that's the Bob Shelton rule of life. He would leave. He would literally leave you.
Yeah.
Like, if you're on time, the bus is already pulling out. I didn't care if you're the star quarterback. You're one of his coaching staff. He is out of there. So yeah, that's the
We
coach
left.
mentality.
We left. Now I think it was a JV game, but the guy ended up being an all-state linebacker, JJ Johnson. We're going. I think it was a JV guy. I don't think it was varsity. We left him. We're going to play Westlake, and we leave him at home
Yep.
because he wasn't ready on time. So that's how I. So, but
But yeah,
yes. So
something you said that this always comes to my mind is the answer might be simple, but it's not easy, right? Like, it's pretty simple. Like, the Bible, we're going through the Sermon on the Mount, and the Bible says you're supposed to love your neighbor. You're supposed to love your enemy. Like, well, that sounds like a simple rule, but man, that's really hard to do, right? And same thing, like when you're like us and like, I want to be on time. I don't want to be late. I'd rather be 15, 20 minutes early, and then I'm going to stay 15, 20 minutes late because that's the coaching mentality that it was. If you're not staying late, you're not working. Like, I have that achiever like gene in me, right? Of let's achieve, achieve, achieve. Other people don't have that mentality. And so for me, I've just got to learn, if I want to be somewhere on time, I'll meet you there, babe. Right. And we just learned that keeps me from having this boil that begins. And like you said, how crazy it is to ruin a trip before you even leave on the trip because you didn't leave 5 minutes earlier. Instead, like just learning to have that peace and that patience and doing that. So yeah, might be simple, but it's not easy. So
Well, we're coming to a close here. I got one question to ask you, Chris.
yeah,
I'm going to start at. I'm going to ask this question to every guest moving forward. So it's really two questions. What is Chris Smith's favorite book, and what is Chris Smith's favorite quote?
well, I mean, I'm a pastor, so of course I'm going to pick the Bible, right? But my life verse is John 3:30. It's what I have tattooed on my arm, right? Just Jesus must increase and I must decrease. And so for me in life, that if I am making more of myself and making myself into a greater thing instead of making Jesus into a greater thing, I'm failing, right? And John the Baptist in this particular scene is just saying everybody's leaving John the Baptist to follow Jesus, and they're like, "Hey, stop them from leaving, John." He's like, "Why? This is the very reason I came, was to make more of Jesus," right? And so that would be the pastor answer, right? As far as just like Chris Smith, the person answer, there's a book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And it's a testimony by a guy named Nabil Qureshi, who is a Muslim and he grows up in a Muslim family. But as he grows, he meets this guy named David Wood. And David Wood is just this friend who loves him. And David Wood's a Christian. And he begins to share with him and have discussions with him about the one true God, which is Jesus Christ. And towards the end of the story, Nabil is wrestling. He's like, I know that Jesus is the one true God, but I can't leave my family. I can't bring shame to my family in this, right? And what the quote that David really, asked him to do is like, well, Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life. Are you going to be on the side of truth, even if it brings shame? Right? And this idea is like, are you willing to stand for truth, even if no one else is willing to stand with you? Right? And he had gone through this long process of just investigating his faith in Islam and just seeing how the Bible was better and seeing how Jesus was better. And it's an amazing testimony. It gives you such a love for Jesus, but also an appreciation for what Islam is, but understanding that what is teaching isn't right. What Jesus teaches is right. And so I love that book. I think it's an amazing book and a testimony of that. But really, for me, the quote in that book is, are you willing to stand for truth, even if you're the only one? Even if it brings shame, even if it brings dishonor to your head, are you willing to stand for truth? And, you were speaking about the pandemic earlier, opening up our church early on in the pandemic was something that a lot of people I think struggled with. Like, is this the right time or not the right time to do that? And ultimately, like, the Bible teaches us to not give up meeting together, and we just want to stand on the side of truth. And we're going to love you whether you want to wear a mask or not wear a mask. We're going to allow you to live out your convictions, but we're going to stand on the Word of God. And even if it's a bold decision, as long as we feel like this is truth, we're going to stand on it. So that's probably where I'd lean. I just think the Word of God is truth, and it's pretty amazing, and that's why I love to teach it and study it and talk about it all the time. And so I luckily have a job that I get to do that in. In
You know,
school, it's a lot harder.
it's funny. I almost named this podcast "The Truth"
Huh, that would
just
have been a
because,
great name.
and my beautiful bride said that was a little bit um, too aggressive. Um,
What, you aggressive, Brad?
because I want the truth to come out. And especially in the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen people twist narratives that
Mhm.
aren't the truth, and I think you're when we go on Sunday, and when Jonathan used to do it, I used to love it when
Yeah,
Jonathan used to say, "Don't believe me, go home and read it,"
yeah.
you know, and
When
and and
that's
that's the
comes to
truth.
the yeah, comes the key thing is, what is going to be your source of truth? Are your feelings going to be your source of truth? Because those are up and down and sideways, right? is the word of God going to be your truth? A book that has been verified over and over, unchanged. I hear this argument that the Bible's been changed, but then the Dead Sea Scroll discovery, right? Cave 4 in Qumran just shows that these are the exact copies of the Old Testament, is exact copies of what were written in these scrolls hundreds and hundreds of years before, the Septuagint came out or before Jesus came. Like, these are the words of God. Right. So am I going to put my faith in myself, or am I going to put my faith in a transcendent God that designed the world, fine-tuned the world, and created me? I've just figured out that I know how much I waver on whether or not to eat ice cream at night. Right. If I can't decide, like, I need to be disciplined the way that I eat, if I can't be disciplined in my diet, how am I going to be disciplined in my life? I'd rather just say, well, I'm going to trust God more than I trust myself. And it may not make sense in the midst of our culture or our friend group or even in our own heart and mind, but I'm going to trust God over my own feelings. And so I think that's why I love teaching the word so much, is because I'm still learning and I'm still figuring out how God created us to be as human beings, how to live a life that honors others, encourages others, and spurs people on. And I don't think there's any better way to live than live for Christ. You're loving your neighbor more than yourself. You're committed to something greater than yourself. You work as if you're working for the Lord. So you should be the best employees. You should be the best neighbors, because you're loving your neighbor when they're hurting and broken. You're loving them in the good times, right? And so I don't think there's any better way to live than live for Jesus. So pretty passionate about that.
There you go. Well, there you go, folks. That is Chris Smith, father, husband, athlete, coach, and lead pastor of Fellowship Church at Plum Creek. 3 sermons on Sunday. Is that 8:30,
10 and 11:30.
8:30, 10, and 11:30. If you're interested in it, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to Chris. And that's about it. But we want to say thank you to you, Chris, for coming on and telling us a little about who you are and what made you and where, all that kind of stuff. And so if y'all are watching this podcast, live cast, please share it. I saw Brian Heidemann just put a comment on there. Share this video, share the page, the podcast with Brad Alexander, because the original Dad Pod, by the way, Chris, we can't use the H word, because my Facebook we call it the H word, because if I actually say it, then
I know
we get spammed crazy. So it's the Dad Pod with Brad Alexander. If y'all could share it, share this live cast, spread the word out there that we are just trying to build relationships one conversation at a time. So
thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, tell the girls hi for me.
Will do.